You're listening to the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host, Ben Eagle. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you are listening. Hello everyone and welcome to episode 239 of the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, Ben Eagle. Now a bit of a different one today as we're looking back through the archive and profiling a few interviews from the past. First up, we're heading way back to July 2020 when I spoke to Somerset pig and arable farmer Fred Price.
Yeah, well, I'm Fred. I farm in Somerset, which is in the southwest of the UK, about an hour down the M5 from Bristol, just at the foot of the Quantock Hills. Pretty wet kind of environment to farm in, particularly after the winter we've just had. That's pretty fresh in the memory. But yeah, no, the farm is a small family farm that passed to me through my mum's family. My aunt ran the farm for 25, 30 years before me, and before her, my grandfather. It's 250 acres now of owned land, and also we've just added 130 acres on a 5-year business tenancy. I'd probably say we're a mixed farm now. Probably around half of the farm is down to grass, mixed herbal lays, and the other half is in rotational arable, and we grow everything we need for the pig diet, and the surplus goes to bakers and mills, mostly in the southwest.
Super. Tell me about your life growing up, because you grew up in London.
That's right. Yeah. So I grew up in London. Used to spend a lot of weekends and holidays down here with my grandma and my aunt, and moved in with them when I went to university. And my parents moved in to the main farmhouse around the same time. Mum grew up here, so
okay.
It's kind of come full circle. Yeah. But it's funny because despite it kind of, I guess, a slightly alternative route into agriculture, for the first few years of running the farm here, which must have been 10, 12 years ago, I pretty much verbatim followed the industry narrative. For a smallish farm, how do you deal with the pressures of producing a cheap commodity? And that is try and expand at every opportunity, try and vertically integrate the supply chain and produce as much as possible, really focusing on yield. So I've it's been a bit of a roller coaster, a decade, I tell you. Yeah.
Did you always want to farm, or did you consider doing other things?
Yeah, definitely. I think if I'm honest though, 20 years ago, I thought farming was driving tractors, and I couldn't get enough of it. So I think what my understanding of and my passion for the farm has definitely evolved. But 100%, it's all I can remember ever wanting to do, ever doing in my spare time. And I've kind of pursued it probably pretty overly dogmatically, really. Yeah.
Tell listeners a bit about the history of the farm, and what it was like when you first began to run it.
So my grandfather came here in the early 50s, and he set about turning the farm into a kind of industrial commercial pig system.
Okay.
And it's interesting, all indoors by the time he was 5 or 10 years in, although they did start by breeding outside. And kind of being reflective on it, it's kind of weird to think that even in the 50s and 60s, the same sort of pressures that our industry is under now, he focused on growth and yield and genetics and output. He vertically integrated his supply chain. He cubed his own food, and he tried to get as big as possible. But at one point the farm had 20, 25 people full time, loads of sort of satellite pig units around, and it's a model that didn't look after him in the same way it didn't look after me. By the time he actually died in his early 50s.
Okay.
So this is probably the early 80s, mid 80s.
Okay.
By the time he passed the farm to his 4 daughters, there was only 2 blokes working here, and there wasn't a pig on the farm, and hadn't been for 5 to 10 years. That kind of
massive change. Yeah,
massive shift. So my aunt really took on the mantle, Caroline, and I think that over riding strand to her 25 years here was just keep going, keep the farm in the family, and hope everything right back cost-wise. And I think not having really had a handle on it myself during that period, but at times when straw was making more money than the grain that they were selling, it must have been fairly traumatic. But thankfully, sacrificed really in a way, because she could have probably done anything. Kept the farm in the family, and meant that there was something there for me to take on, and how lucky I was. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you were talking about when you first started managing the place, you were focused on let's say a certain type of management. Tell me about those first few years, and what was going through your mind at that time, the kind of practices that you were doing.
Well, I guess as a small, in inverted commas, family farm, we lacked the kind of economy of scale to bring our overheads down. And so my only lever of profitability was yield. If I grow 12 ton a hectare every week instead of 7 or 8, then in theory I bring my cost of production down per ton, and the difference is profit.
Yeah.
And so I really did push hard for yield, and it was weird after a few years to that was my first kind of failure in a sense, because we were achieving really impressive yields, but financially we were in a really awful place. I did get to the point 3 or 4 years in, combination of bad harvest and wet year, I think it was 2012, 2013, mm-hmm. where I ended up financing inputs for the next year's crop based on the harvest I hadn't even had yet.
Yeah.
And you factor in also, I'd taken out higher purchases on machinery in order to kind of deliver these inputs in an accurate way, in an efficient, timely way. And by inputs, I mean, we were pushing it hard on nitrogen. We were using 4 or 5 fungicide applications to our cereals, and a whole host of trace elements, micronutrients, you name it.
Doing everything that the agronomist book tells you.
Yeah, and I think so. If you take the capital kind of heavy side of it to one side and just focus on the variable costs, I think what really unlocked the thought process in my mind was that we were seeing this plateau in yield, maybe even a negative slant. And this idea that in our industry, input costs, variable costs, and yield have some sort of linear relationship where the more you do, the better the outcome. I just discovered the hard way that wasn't the case. And I think I put that down to some of the inputs that we were using having a kind of detrimental effect on what you might say is the underlying fertility or natural fertility, i.e. soil health. And I think I'm principally talking about fungicides, insecticides, and soluble nitrogen.
Yeah.
So really that was the first 3 or 4 years was a kind of a lesson in failure and trying to working out what the problem was rather than knowing what the solution or the journey that I was about to go on would be.
Yeah. That's really interesting that you use that word failure. Actually, I was talking with Andy Gage, an Essex farmer, on the podcast several weeks ago now, about that whole sort of when you fail, you learn and you innovate. So what were the key things that you were trying to move towards, I suppose, at that time, and what steps did you start to take in place to begin to move towards the kind of system that you now have?
So like in broad terms, I think I changed my focus away from a kind of crop focus to a soil focus. Okay. So before we were trying to manage the crop to reach its potential. And in essence, everything from this point onwards became about soil upwards, manage the soil to get a good crop. Everything else follows.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a dangerous door to open, because once you start thinking from the soil upwards, you realize there's a whole host of things you're not doing that you need to be doing. But more difficult is there's a whole load of things that you are doing that you really need to work out a way of winding your neck in on. And specifically what I'm talking about really is 2 things. And I didn't think these at the time. This is me looking back on the journey and kind of thinking, oh yeah, okay, so you can put these things in these boxes. But one is we shifted from managing nitrogen as the main kind of crop input to managing carbon. And here, what I mean is, I was watching Joel Williams like on YouTube or something, and he had this picture of the soil food web, and it kind of, that for me really just made all these things that were going on in my brain just fit together in a really sort of nice visual way. I think I've worked in like pictures, and I'm quite sensory rather than technical.
Yeah.
And this idea that, you know, if you focus on the bottom of the food web, and the carbon is the feed source of microorganisms, and therefore push carbon in at one end, you get a really vibrant, dynamic soil ecosystem. And the kind of death and decay and the natural cycles that happen through that web release nutrients, soluble nutrients in an organic form, available for crop and plant health. So if you just focus on carbon, everything else follows. And then the wonderful thing about the soil food web is, analogy is that it's not just about feeding the crop, it also creates the environment that the crop needs to grow. It creates, induces soil like aggregation and good soil structure, a healthy population of all kinds of different things in the soil that mean that one pathogen can't kind of dominate. It increases, you know, nutrient availability as well as the plant's ability to get nutrients. So that I like the soil food web, and that was kind of motivated a real focus on carbon as a management decision. And then the other thing really was trying to like embed diversity into our crop rotation at every kind of level. So I don't just mean crop rotation, I mean bring it right back to within one field, so intercropping, but then even within one monoculture. So within a wheat crop, within one field, we want genetic diversity. And I feel like the reason for that is purely to build resilience.
We mentioned two sort of terms, agroecology and regenerative farming, in the introduction. What do those mean to you? Because I mean, what you've just been talking about, that's describing it in many ways. But what does it actually mean?
Yeah, so I think if regenerative agriculture isn't a thing, it's much more sort of more performed, as it were. Like it's how you see the farm, it's how you feel when you're walking on a farm. It's quite sensory, and it informs all of your decision making. And there are some like overbearing values, and they're mostly agronomic and biological. It's about thinking about how nature operates and trying to tailor your practices in that image, I think. But it's not a kind of easily defined, codified set of what a farm will look like, a regenerative farm or a non-regenerative farm. And that's why, you know, no two regenerative farms look the same, because everyone in their own environment, their own context, informed by the same kind of values, comes up with a different solution. But it's also, I think, why regenerative over particularly the last 12 months, but really the last few years, has gained such traction, because it's not easily kind of codified or written down, and therefore not commodified that easily. And so it's been able to break down a lot of the barriers and the disconnects within our industry. So big, small, organic, conventional, pastoral, arable, you know, everyone can be regenerative. My goal has been to start by saying, how do I want to grow this pig or this cereal crop or this bean crop, and then work backwards. And if you rewind 10, 12 years ago, I was starting by saying, well, what's the price of this commodity, and therefore how do I need to grow it? And that's what took me down the industrial, intensive, productivist kind of thought process.
But interestingly, on a business level, has changing the way that your model, has it impacted vastly on your bottom line, on your profitability?
Well, yes, we're profitable and we've got a long-term future. If I'd have carried on farming the way I did for the first 3 years, we wouldn't be having this conversation now.
There we are.
Even if you did want to talk about, 12-ton hectare wheat crops, which you're probably not that interested in. But there's two things to say there. I mean, one, it's not so much about making more money; it's about knowing how much money you need to make and making that money every year. It's about resilience. I mean, there were, in the first 3 or 4 years, there were years where I did actually make more money than we make in an average year now. but they're also like, for every year like that, there's 2 years you've got to weather losses, and another year or two that you break even. So it's this kind of boom and bust, stressful business I couldn't handle, I think. But that's one side of it. It's profitable but resilient, and it's also much lower risk, because it's not as capital intensive. But the other side of it would be the way we think about profit on the farm. So we used to have a rotation where we thought of everything through the lens of a gross margin for crop X or Y or Z.
Yep.
And now part of our system, you have to acknowledge that there are elements of the rotation that you're earning the right to sort of draw down on with other elements of the rotation. So I'm thinking mainly the cover crops and the grass, which are two big levers of like carbon building diversity, that earn us the right to grow a half decent crop of cereals without inputs at the end of it. So how do you account for those progressive parts of your system? You can't just say, well, wheat's my most profitable crop, so I'm just going to grow wheat. So we look at the farm as a whole gross margin, a farm gross margin now, which is a really powerful way of enabling you to place value on things that you might not have done and therefore wouldn't have put into the rotation.
Somerset farmer Fred Price. Next up, we're heading across to Wales for my conversation with Abby Reader, and this episode was recorded in March 2021. We're talking dairy today, and I'm thrilled to be joined from South Wales by Abby Reader, MBE, a third-generation dairy farmer who manages a herd of 200 Holstein Friesian and dairy shorthorns, as well as 100 sheep and 200 acres of arable on 700 acres of land near Cardiff. Abby, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on. How are things in South Wales?
Yeah, they're pretty good at the moment. End of March, so the cows are out, which is quite early for us. But yeah, really nice to have a change of routine after the winter.
So you're a third generation farmer. How long's the family been where you are now?
My grandfather on my father's side married and moved here in the early 1930s, and they've been here ever since. He had two sons. Obviously, one was my father, and the other one is my uncle Robert, and I farm with those two. But I also farm with my mum. And her parents were farming not too far from here, closer towards Cardiff, on a slightly smaller scale. And they had like a local, I suppose they supplied the village locally with groceries, and used to do a bit of milk, some pork, chickens, and a little bit of veg, and supplied the village of Rada, if anybody's familiar with it.
Shout out there. And where I take it that you just got the bug through the family.
Yeah, well, interesting background, really. We're so close to Cardiff. I'm less than 4 miles as the crow flies from the Civic Centre in Cardiff.
Wow.
From the Senates and Cardiff Castle and all that.
I didn't know that. Amazing.
Yeah, really, really close. You wouldn't know it. We're very lucky. We're in quite a little backwater, but very, very close. So I went to school right in the heart of Cardiff, and I had a very urban upbringing. So as a youngster, I was the odd one out because I liked mud and trees, and all the other girls in the school did not like those things. They liked pretty dresses and nice parties and things like that, which never really interested me. So my route towards farming was unusual. Never really thought it would be a career option. And it was only when I had finished my A-levels and I had no idea what I was going to do, as lots of kids don't at that age.
Yep.
And I just took a random phone call of somebody who supplies the business, who said, well, what are you going to do? I have no idea. And he said, well, why don't you go to agricultural college? And he just recommended a college, and I phoned up, got a prospectus, and I didn't look back from there, really. Wow. Best thing I ever did.
Yeah. Let's pause and actually let's talk about the herd. Let's talk about the cows first. What's the history of the herd, and tell me a bit about the herd and your system.
Yeah, so I've mentioned obviously my grandfather. He bought some cows with him to the farm, and the majority of the cows we've got here are descended from them. There are a couple of exceptions. Those exceptions are the ones descended from my mother's father. So I feel really privileged that I've got the bloodlines from both sides of the family. The dairy shorthorns obviously were the foundation. So both sets of grandparents had that breed. That was a breed everybody had around the time of the war. It's a very native British breed. It's now a rare breed. It is on the critical list and they're dying out. They were struggling at the minute with trying to get, I suppose, good enough research on genetics to make that breed keep up with the Holstein Friesian, which is just so reliable. But to honour my grandparents, we keep a nucleus herd that we will preserve, and we will fight to make sure we do our bit to stop them going extinct. Yeah, we're all year round calving. So we aim to have about 12 to 15 calves every month, which means that we supply milk at a set level all year round. So we supply what I would call the liquid market. So it's milk that goes into bottles into supermarkets. Trying to think what else I could share about that. I suppose we have invested recently in the farm. So when my grandfather moved to the farm, we had an old 1800s barn, which still stands today and is still used.
Brilliant.
But since then, there's been add-ons. So a new milking parlour was added when my father, I suppose, was my age or a bit younger. And we have recently renewed that milking parlour now. And we've been in quite a new setup for the last 6 years. And it's been life-changing, really.
Yeah. I was going to say, I mean, and in terms of short-term plans for the dairy itself, do you have any plans?
Yeah, well, COVID has taught me how much people enjoy shorter supply chains and would like an opportunity to perhaps become more involved with the farm that is producing some of the food that they eat. So I am interested in looking at vending machines, maybe not on the farm, but locally vended in the villages around us, with opportunities then for anyone who's buying to come and visit us maybe one Sunday a month or as they feel. So yeah, I'm looking at that. It's a lot of work. I'm a farmer, so I enjoy being with the cows. And once you start branching out into processing, it's a different ball game. And I guess I'm nervous that it'll take me away from the cows too much.
Let's talk about some environment stuff. So you're part of, you've got a Glassdeer Advanced program on the farm. You also work with a local wildlife group. Tell me about that.
Well, the Glassdeer Advanced is the Welsh Government scheme. So there's Glassdeer, which is sort of I hesitate to use the word baseline level because that's wrong, but it covers quite a wide variety of environmental things you can do on the farm, from planned hedge cutting of certain areas to, I don't know, fencing of waterways and various bits and pieces like fencing woodland or wild bird strips. And then Glassdeer Advanced, I suppose, just goes that little bit further. So we have one field on the farm that's got a burial chamber on it, an ancient burial chamber. And people come and visit that a lot, as you can imagine. It's a bit like, there's a few burial chambers in the area. So I suppose it's our sort of mini Welsh version of a Stonehenge.
Okay.
And people walk everywhere. So we have made that field open access so they can walk everywhere, and we get payments for that. So that would really be what Glassdeer Advanced is. It works quite well. I get more pleasure out of working with the local wildlife group because I can see the results. So they came to us, quite a few years ago now, and said, look, do you think you could spare a little plot of land for us to plant a few fruit trees on? Okay. They're only talking 1/4 of an acre, probably less than that.
Yeah.
We said, we would love to be involved with the community. We've now got, trying to think, I lose track. I think we've got 8 community orchards on the farm. They're all very
fantastic.
Small. They're all linked
Brilliant.
up. Yep. They're restoring a pond. We've got a small corner in one field, which is a little rewilding site that they want to have a go on. Again, they're less than 1/2 acre, but I take a lot of pride in that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And clearly engagement generally is really important for you, which we'll get onto. But let's stick with dairy for now. For those outside of dairy, it can sometimes be difficult to see whether dairy is in a good or a more challenging place at any one time. You sort of see conflicting stories. And from the outside, there've been, I suppose there's the story that there've been lots of farmers who've left the industry in recent, certainly in the last 20 years. There was a wave in 2001 when my own farm, actually, we left dairy then, and a load of others in this part of the world. And it has been reducing number in terms of farm units, but at the same time, those that are in the industry, there has been a heck of a lot investment going on as well. So what's your take on where dairy is at the moment?
All the signals are telling us really that dairy is globally doing well. demand for dairy products is rising by 2% every year globally. If you hone in on that and you look at the UK, demand is perhaps relatively static. However, there's almost, you could say there's a little bit of a decline in liquid milk, but it's being superseded by an increase in demand for cheese.
Yeah.
And again, over the last year, that has really taken off.
Absolutely.
During COVID, people turned to, especially cheddar, as an affordable food that they could have in the home at lunchtime, because normally they'd be going out to a canteen or I don't know, some local bakery or something, whereas they haven't had that opportunity. So cheddar has really grown, and that we've seen a changing pattern now as people have sort of crested the cheddar and are now interested in looking at other different British varieties. And if you add on top of that then Brexit, there have been a few issues. It may not have been noticed but there have been issues with trade, so with cheese coming in, cheese going out. So people do appear at the minute to be looking more to different British cheeses and trialing them. So, you know, dairy looks good. You could probably divide the industry into those who supply retail, so the supermarkets, the corner shops and things like that, and those who supply food service, so the hotels. Let's think about the cruise ships, the airplanes, the airports, trains, vending machines. And those who are in the food service at the minute are the ones who are most vulnerable. But I'm sure it will come back. You know, we just need to get through this COVID issue and things will level out. But very hard time for those guys at the minute.
Right, we're now going to move on to the part of the show where we talk about wider industry challenges. And we can't talk about dairy, especially out west, without talking about TB. Usually when I talk about TB, because it comes up every few months, I just ask for an update from your part of the world, really. That's probably question number one.
Okay, well, TB in Wales, talk about Wales as a whole. If you look at the figures that are being released by Welsh Government, they will say that new herd incidents are declining slightly. And I suppose length of breakdowns, variable. You know, there's the figures released by Welsh Government, and then there's the real life sort of stories that you come across all the time. In the farming world in Wales, TB is really bad. It's the one thing that gets everybody rattled. It causes a lot of sadness, a lot of stress, not just for the farmers as well. I mean, for the vets who live through it with us. You know, and for our nutritionists or anybody really who's dealing with the farm, they all live with you through it. It's particularly bad. So Wales is divided into 3 zones. There's the low incidence area, the intermediate, which is what I'm in, and the high risk area. So there's a high risk area, particularly down in the southwest of Wales. And some people there have been in and out of TB for 16 years. I have had my own experience of TB breakdown, probably going into my 3rd year now, on and off. Okay. Never experienced it before that. You know, we'd had almost a 10-year history of you know, being able to prove that we were TB clear, and suddenly we went down with it. During that time, I have lost, in my first breakdown, I lost 13 animals, and I'm in the middle of my second breakdown now. 5 animals have gone already. I was saying to a farmer in England the other day, you know, in England, you have the Badger Cull areas, you know, which are all, despite what the press might portray to the public, these are very well controlled areas. You know, there is a lot of work that goes into these Badger Cull areas. People just don't go running out the countryside with a gun because they want to have fun. You know, there's a lot of science that goes into this, and it is backed by Natural England. Yep. We don't have that in Wales. There's no help coming. Nobody seems to care. And the impact that it's having on lives is really quite distressing. On this farm and in parts of West Wales now, we have started a pilot, which has taken quite a while to get to, but has required a lot of I suppose lobbying with AFA in Wales and with Welsh Government to say, let us try this. This is for private testing, because I just don't have any faith in the testing that's going on, and I do not want to lose control. So actually this week we have started private testing. I've done 60 animals. It could all go wrong, because I have agreed that if I private test and I find any animals with TB, then I will have to pay for that myself, and I will have to get rid of them myself, but I will not lose control. and I will not go down without fighting for my herd. And we just have to keep doing what we can, really, and hopefully we can pass it on to someone else.
Yeah, and with the risk of getting too political, I mean, why do you think there is such a difference in attitude between England and Wales?
Well, at the risk of getting too political, look, we have a Labour government in Wales and we have a Conservative government in England. There are a lot more rural constituencies in England, so therefore the MP profile, I suppose, that goes forward to government is a lot more reflective of rural issues. If you come to Wales, it's really not. And living in an urban area, I feel like I definitely feel that more than perhaps a lot of farmers who are out in the countryside, and there is a very limited understanding of rural issues. And if I was going to be really pessimistic, no one really seems to care. And that's why things like Cows on Tour were born, because, we have to show people why they need to care. We can't just blame everyone and say, oh, you hate us, and this, that, and the other. We haven't even tried to connect. But at the same time, I won't sit around either. I don't do that. My herd is under threat, and I will do whatever I can to save them.
Following on from that, and semi-linked in some ways, want to talk about NVZs, another farming acronym for any non-farmers out there, nitrate vulnerable zones. And you actually came on the Kite podcast to talk about this a few weeks ago. So we've now got an all Wales NVZ in action. I mean, what impact do the new rules have on you and your business?
Yep. So not very zen is the NVZ word.
Like that.
Yeah, I think, look, the big issue with NVZs is our own Environment Agency here in Wales says that we currently have 2.3% of Wales is under NVZs. And they did a study back in 2016, 2017, which said that this area ought to increase to about 8% because there were certain waterways that were starting to come under threat. So we have this recommendation on the one hand, and then we have our own government recommendation, which says, well, actually, why not just do the whole 100% and chuck everybody under it? And it requires so much investment and puts so much strain on businesses. And, we need to be very concerned about the tenant farmers. So those are the ones whose landlord may not want them to suddenly start investing in slurry stores or digging ditches, planting hedges, whatever it might be to try and control that water. We need to be concerned about problems like TB. So when I broke down with TB for the first time, and we were broken down for 15 months, my animal stocking rate increased from 404 animals up to 593. So I would have breached my NVZ regulations because I wouldn't have had enough storage for that. And yet I couldn't move animals anywhere because there was nowhere for them to go. So all of these stresses and strains have to come in. And, to go from 8% to 100% and require farmers to invest money they don't have in equipment that they clearly don't need because there isn't a problem in that area just makes no sense. So, yeah, really big bone of contention at the minute with ourselves. It put up quite a war really between ourselves and the government. I've never known anything like it.
And finally, we're jumping ahead another year to this recording in April 2022 with Nikki Yoxall. This is from episode 145. Today, I'm heading to glorious Aberdeenshire to meet first-generation farmer and grazier Nikki Yoxall, who I last spoke to for the Nature Friendly Farming Network podcast. Do go and check out that podcast if you haven't already listened. With a background in teaching and further education, Nikki is an absolute, and she really is, she's an absolute inspiration for anyone looking to get into agriculture. That was key from my first conversation with her. Along with her husband, she has grown her wee mob, who you'll hear about today, from just a couple of heifers in the early days on 18 acres of land, and now works with neighbouring farmers and landowners on a number of landscape scale projects, some really exciting projects, including a particularly interesting rewilding project, which I'm sure we'll talk about today as well. Nikki, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Ben. Thanks so much. You're very kind saying all those lovely things.
Oh, not at all. I don't say anything that's not true. Tell us about your part of Aberdeenshire, first of all.
Yeah, so we are on the River Devon, which is a beautiful river, has been historically quite a famous sort of salmon river, not far from the River Spey. And we are in a part of upland Aberdeenshire, sort of near the Murray border. So Aberdeenshire has the best of everything, really. It's kind of got from the mountain to the sea, and we're in the upland bit, which is, particularly nice.
Okay. And I've already mentioned that you're not from a farming background yourself. So what was life like for you growing up? You grew up in Shropshire?
Yeah, so we weren't a farming family, but we were very definitely a horsey family. So I grew up in very rural Shropshire, which was beautiful, and had lots of horses. And, because we were in a very rural place, inevitably had lots of friends that were farming and spent quite a lot of time on farms and kind of in lambing sheds and things. So yeah, it was a lovely childhood. Sadly, my dad passed away when I was 12, so I had quite a tricky time during my teens kind of coping with that. But yeah, ended up kind of, which led to later on decisions around not going to university at 18, as most people do, and kind of taking a different career path. But yeah, it was kind of equally idyllic, but also quite stressful after that point when I was 12, and we had that kind of horrible experience of dad passing away.
Yeah. So I mean, so when you were 18, and you were sort of looking at your life ahead, was there anything that sort of struck out that you wanted to do? I mean, obviously you began a career in education, but was that part of the plan?
No, and I didn't initially kind of go into teaching. I'd got a place at university, a very good university, despite kind of having a pretty tricky time doing my GCSEs and A-levels. And I suddenly decided that I wanted a year off, went and lived independently, got this little flat in Shrewsbury. And after that, decided I didn't want to go to university. And my mum said, well, if you're not going to go to university, you need to go and get a job that's got a good pension scheme. And I couldn't join the forces.
That's a great mum comment.
Yeah, I couldn't. And
great parenting there.
Very sensible for my mum. If anyone knows her, they'll know that she's not normally that sensible. But yeah, I couldn't join the forces because I've got pretty bad asthma. So I joined the prison service, and I actually did a couple of years as a prison officer.
Really? I didn't know that.
Kind of. So went and did that for a couple of years. It was incredibly stressful. I was far too young to be given that kind of level of responsibility.
Wow. Yeah.
And dealing with some really troubled people in a really sad part of their life. People who were very mentally ill and who were really at crisis point, and being in a prison isn't a good place to be when you feel like that. So kind of working with men who were really struggling with their mental health in the prison service. So I ended up leaving that to go, and I just realized it wasn't good for my mental health being there.
Yeah.
And I got a job actually as an outdoor instructor for a kids adventure company.
I will be bringing you down here next week then.
Yeah, so for a season, I thought I'll just go and do something seasonal, get my mind in a different place and take a break. And it was somewhere that had accommodation, so I didn't have to worry about kind of finding anywhere to live or any of that sort of stuff. And that was in Devon, and I met my now husband there. So he was also working there at the same time. And obviously working with groups of kids and kind of delivering outdoor education instruction made me realize how much I love kind of, standing in front of a group of children. Yeah. So that was kind of where the education bit started. And then I ended up working for an organization that works with kids that want to join the forces. So because I'd worked in the prison service, there was that kind of uniform services link.
All ties in.
Yeah. So I was working there. And I got really interested in teaching maths and English with those. So the government changed the rules that if you were in full-time education and you hadn't got your GCSEs, that you had to do some sort of maths and English. So I ended up teaching these kids that wanted to join the forces a bit of maths and a bit of English, and just loved it and seemed to be pretty good at it. And it just felt like a natural place to be. Ended up going and working in a college, and then kind of got really interested in the education sector in schools. If you want to be a head teacher, people are really supportive of that. If there's lots of programs and kind of ways of developing your experience to become a head teacher. But in the college sector, that doesn't exist. And you're kind of quite often, people look at you in a weird way if you say that you want to be a principal, or you want to go into senior management, or you want to kind of develop your management skills. So I ended up getting involved in all these different kind of management development programs because I thought, I want to progress my career, and this is the direction I want to go in. And I ended up blagging my way to a conference where I met the deputy principal of one of the best colleges in England, and basically said, "Oh, if you've got any jobs coming, here's my card, let me know." And about 3 weeks later, I got a message from him saying, "I don't know if you're interested, but we've got this head of land-based education job going. It's
Wow.
probably not something you're interested in, but it would be a good way of getting some interview experience."
Okay.
And then I became head of land-based learning. So yeah, that was the kind of the process that I went through to get there.
How incredible. What I love about that is clearly there was never any plan.
No.
But you are a great example of one of those people who one thing has led on to another, and life is just a great adventure.
Totally. Yeah, never really had a plan.
So you're at this land-based college, you
Yep.
start the new job.
Yeah.
What's going through your head? What's the experience? And I'm guessing it's a complete change of life, but it's also it's a change of location as well.
Yeah, so that took us to West Sussex, and we got a lovely house as part of the job on site. So it was about 500-acre estate, really beautiful ancient woodlands full of bluebells. I really miss that actually, because we don't really have them up here.
Sounds tough.
Yeah, it was really tough life. And we had obviously as part of the estate, we had a farm, which was a brilliantly run dairy unit, and we had about, I think, 200 lin ewes and a few pigs and things. And then we also had like the animal care unit and the equine. Because of my horsey background, I kind of fitted in okay with the equine bit, so that kind of made sense. And we ran arboriculture and horticulture and all these different programs. But I always found myself drawn to the farm. And that was probably because the farm manager, Dan, was just an absolute legend, just an incredible guy. Yeah, just so passionate, so brilliant at working with kids that had come from a really difficult background, but also so knowledgeable. And he had come from a Cumbrian dairy farm and had come south towards the bright lights of Brighton, and hadn't quite made it, and had ended up in very kind of conservative West Sussex. So yeah, that was quite interesting. Yeah, we had basically it was a grass-based dairy system, and that really opened my eyes to kind of low input farming and what the potential of that was and how that could run. And Dan was out there with his plate meter every evening, and I was often down there helping out at lambing, or just going and talking to students and seeing what they were doing. And I was just so drawn to the farm. I absolutely loved it. And we decided that we were really happy there and we weren't going to move. And I'd been there for 3 years, and we said, right, this is it. We'll do at least another 5 years here. It's the dream job, beautiful place, brilliant people. And then I got encouraged to apply for a job in Scotland, which I felt was out of my league. It was a senior management post.
Okay.
And I thought, oh, well, I'll just apply. And if I don't get it, it doesn't matter, because I'm really happy where I am. And if I did get it, in the unlikely event I got this job, then we can, can always turn it down. Don't have to take it. And yeah, I got the job. So,
all change again.
Yeah. And I think it was because I was very relaxed, because I was like, well, if I don't get it doesn't matter. So I was very chilled out in the interview process. And I got offered the job and thought, right, we've got to move to Scotland then. So that was it.
Okay. So the move happened. Where did you move particularly? And again, take me back to that particular life change again.
Yeah, so that was 4 years ago. So we moved here in very start of 2018. We moved to here, to where we are now at How Mill. Well, sort of. We put an offer in on the house. It got accepted. And then, as is the way with houses that have private water supplies, there was this absolute nightmare where basically the mortgage company weren't happy with the water results. Oh. And this rolled on for 5 months. So I'd started this new job, big, scary senior manager job, never been that responsible for that many people or that much money before in my life. And doing that whilst living out of Airbnbs for 5 months with 4 dogs
sounds fun.
Quite an experience. But luckily we found some great people in the village actually, who were quite happy with us being in their Airbnb for most of that time, and they actually built a kennel as well outside for us for the dogs, which was wonderful. And we kind of we still see them now and again. And so we Airbnb'd for 5 months, and then we managed to move in to How Mill, and that was us 4 years ago, and it's been a bit of a whirlwind since then.
Tell me about the wee mob. How did that begin?
So whilst we had moved here, my husband decided to take some time off. Not, he wasn't working. And we decided he didn't need to find a job initially. Financially we were okay. So he sort of took a bit of time to work out what he wanted to do. He used to restore classic cars, which didn't really kind of fit with our like environmental goals, I guess. So when we moved up here, he obviously stopped doing that, and just wanted to take a bit of time to work out what he wanted to do. And the Soil Association in Scotland ran some amazing knowledge transfer projects, and they were incredibly just inclusive and open to anybody. And so he started going to some of these events, and at one of those he met Rob Havard, who folk listening may know, farms in Worcestershire.
I think he was something like episode 40 or something like that of the podcast.
Okay,
scroll back, listeners.
Yeah, so Rob's brilliant, and he is, for those that don't know, an ecologist and a farmer, and he's been using holistic management for a long time now, probably well over a decade, I'd imagine, maybe longer than that. And heard him speak, and everything he said just made total sense to my husband, and was like, yeah, of course, why wouldn't you move animals, and why wouldn't you kind of integrate farming into the ecological kind of niche within the farm system? And it just sort of, all this stuff made sense. And James had also been learning about permaculture, and in permaculture there's this recommendation that you wait for a year and observe, that you don't kind of, when you move to new land, that you don't rush in, but that you take 12 months to kind of learn where the cold spots are in the winter and observe kind of the different plants that come up, and that you just take time. So we did that for a year, and which is very difficult because I was desperate to have chickens, because we'd left all our chickens in Sussex, and I really wanted hens, and James was like, no, we've got to do this observation period.
You've got to wait.
Yeah, which for someone with ADHD, who is incredibly impulsive and very impatient, it was the hardest.
It's a bit of a problem.
Months. Yeah, really difficult. So as soon as the 12 months, even before the 12 months was up, I was like, right, ready to just buy animals and go crazy with it. But we actually used the time to think about, right, cattle make sense. From what we'd learned from Rob, cattle 100% made sense. And we also have, quite locally to here, Lynn Breckcroft, which some folk may have heard of. So Lynn and Sandra, who have become great friends of ours, and they have been using holistic management, and they run an incredibly successful small farm, and they've just got a book out, so highly recommend reading that. Sorry, a bit of a plug there.
Yeah, give that a plug.
This Wild Farming Life, it's very good. So we kind of chatted to them about how we wanted to have cattle. They were really supportive. They have Highlands, and we didn't want Highlands because we're not in the Highlands. We started thinking about rare breeds, and we thought, well, there's an Aberdeen Angus, which would be perfect, but the native line is kind of more tricky to get hold of, kind of because they've been obviously developed into a more of a commercial kind of beast. So native Angus are a bit trickier to get hold of. And we started looking into rare breeds and discovered Shetland cattle, and thought, oh, they're nice. They've got horns. They're actually, dual purpose. Well, they used to be draft animals as well. So on crofts and on Shetland, they would be used for draft, power, as milking animals, and also for beef. And we thought, we really like that kind of, the multiple use of them, and the fact that they're native. So we got a couple of Shetland heifers, and they arrived looking absolutely terrified in this trailer, and some bloke had turned up to kind of do some groundworks here a week before, and had just dug like a massive hole, and it was all like had happened without us knowing really about when he was coming. I just remember these two heifers coming off the trailer, and I just felt so embarrassed that these people had turned up. They delivered them for us, and the place was just chaos, and we'd like rigged up this really bad race and basically kind of went through the garden. It was just ridiculous. So we got them into a paddock, electric fence trained them, and that was it. We were off moving them daily, and we then got another one. We did a cow funder, so people started to follow what we were doing on social media, and they really liked it. And at the same time, James Reedbanks did a cow funder for his Belties. So I jumped on the back of that and said, other cow funders are available. And we had some incredibly generous people donate money. And with that, we were able to buy Georgia, who is now our herd matriarch. And we just kind of continued from there. And we were able to buy more cattle. and build the herd. And we also brought in some Galloways as well. So we now run a mixed herd of Shetlands and Galloways with one odd one out shorthorn cross. So yeah, we've kind of got this, but we're really interested in kind of how we breed for resilience. So we're not as focused on kind of the pure, kind of meeting the breed standard. For us, it's about how do we breed a resilient herd for the kind of system that we want to run.
Okay. Tell me about working with your neighbours and especially the rewilding project that you're involved with.
Yeah, well, because we only have 18 acres, we weren't going to be able to carry that many cattle on that. And 9 of it is woodland. And some of it's, some of it's bog, some of it's incredibly steep. So we kind of knew if we wanted to grow this and actually make it financially viable, we'd need to find other land. And we had neighbours kind of driving past slowly, looking over the fence, like, what are they doing there with that electric fence? What's going on? We got into conversation with a neighbour who said, this stuff you're doing, could you come and do that on our land?
Okay.
We've got this bit that we don't graze the sheep, but we'd really like, it's 40-acre block, and it's the most beautiful piece of ground. I just love it. It's mixed birch wood. There's loads of scrub. There's kind of species-rich meadows in parts of it. It's just really beautiful kind of mosaic landscape. So we started putting them up there, moving them daily again, and it went really, really well. Then another landowner who's our other neighbour said, oh, yeah, I like what you're doing. We've got some ground that, we can't really manage with our sheep. So everyone around here has sheep. We can't really manage our sheep on it. Could you put the cattle on it? Again, absolutely perfect. Just, cattle really settled in, really beautiful silver pasture system. And from then on, we just kind of continued working with other people and picking up bits of land here and there. And we noticed that the estate opposite us on the other side of the river had been bought by Highlands Rewilding. So that's Jeremy Leggett, who he initially bought the Budloit estate, and then he's since bought Beldorney and some other land. And his focus is on nature restoration. So, the idea of rewilding, but also thinking about how to engage better with local communities. And he is committed to mass ownership. So he doesn't own the estates himself. They're owned by Highlands Rewilding, which is a company with, at the moment, I think 50 shareholders currently own Beldorney, and they're looking to increase the number of shareholders so that it's not just kind of one green laird doing his thing. Actually, it's about more people having access to own land in this way. So we got in touch with him and said, we noticed that you've bought this, we've heard about that happening. We are your local graziers and we're always looking for land, and this is the way we work. And he was really interested and invited us to go and have a conversation. And that kind of probably went on for about 4 months, backwards and forwards, different kind of conversations. And what I understand is that every time he spoke to people about possibly bringing animals onto the ground, our name kept popping up. So other people would say, oh, you probably want to talk to Nikki and James. They're probably neighbours of yours.
Yep.
Or, have you heard of these Grampian graziers? They're out in your neck of the woods.
Yep.
So it just sort of felt like it kept coming back to us. And he then invited us to work with him on the estate. And we're now working, we've got the wee mob over there, and we're particularly interested in developing or restoring species-rich grassland. And kind of building in silver pastoral kind of wood pasture systems as well, because that's a kind of thing that we really love.
That's it for today, and I hope you enjoyed that short delve into the archive. Don't forget, you can always listen to any episode at any time. Just have a browse and let me know what you're listening to. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on previous episodes. Next time, we'll be in Cornwall, and I'll be meeting beef farmer Ben Thomas. Until then, though, I'm Ben Eagle. This has been Meet the Farmers, and thank you very much for listening.